Paul Benowitz was driven insane by the US government as they tried desperately to cover up his work on UFOs. But what did he know that the US government didn't want to get out? Paul Benowitz was a physicist pursuing his PhD in physics with an established, successful electronics company called Thunder Scientific in New Mexico. His primary clients were the Air Force and NASA, and he even bought a home and set up a lab next to Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque. From his house, he frequently observed strange colored lights in the sky around the base, lights that moved too quickly to be aircraft. Paul, being an engineer and expert in electronics, set up his radio equipment and detected transmissions on a frequency higher than what the military used at that time. He analyzed these signals and discovered they contained data bursts with messages. Despite the Air Force denying the stories of UFOs and aliens, they privately confirmed Paul's findings and even funded his UFO research. However, the events eventually led Paul to end up in a mental institution. Before we continue, make sure you subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. This raises the question of why this occurred. Paul Benowitz received a data burst with noticeable patterns, but he couldn't make sense of it manually. However, he had access to an early home computer and wrote his own operating system and software. He fed the alien broadcast into the computer and initially got nonsense messages. To decrypt the messages, Paul used a crypto analyst trick and told his program to assume that certain words like ship, base, air, water, and time would be present. This approach worked, allowing him to put the messages into context. Instead of learning to speak the alien language and translating it into English, Paul used the computer to analyze the patterns. For example, if the transmission had something to do with making coffee, he would input the context and look for patterns related to beans, water, sugar, milk, etc. He gradually expanded to less frequently used phrases like grind, brew, and drink, which helped him understand the syntax. Although he didn't know the exact words, he grasped their meaning. Initially, Paul's translations were almost meaningless, but he persisted and eventually gained a general idea of what the messages were saying. While his translations weren't perfect, they provided insight into the aliens' intentions and why they were present. However, Paul's decision to send his own message on the same frequency based on his decoded language was debatable. Soon after, he received a reply from the aliens. Through his translations, Paul discovered that the aliens wanted women from Earth and had bases that obtained supplies from a starship. The messages also hinted at their struggle and the need for assistance. Paul realized that the aliens were not here for benevolent reasons. Despite his suspicion, he engaged in two-way communication with them to gather more information about their intentions. What he discovered shocked him to this core. Their communications revealed that the aliens' home planet was dying, and multiple alien races had infiltrated Earth. These races included the familiar gray aliens with large eyes, as well as a humanoid alien race resembling humans but more attractive. Paul became convinced that an invasion was imminent and felt a responsibility to warn people. As a trusted military contractor and veteran, he prepared a dossier with his theory and findings to present to the Air Force. The government took his concerns seriously and brought in the Air Force's Office of Special Investigation to review his work. Agent Richard Doty was assigned to Paul's case and visited his house to examine the film, radio equipment, and other tools Paul used to document and communicate with aliens. The Air Force agreed to fund Paul's research under the condition that he shared his findings directly with them, which he agreed to. With the assistance of Agent Doty and the Air Force, Paul believed he could gather enough intelligence to defeat the aliens and save humanity. Regarding the movies E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, there is a belief that they were influenced by these findings and others of that time. The purpose of these films was to gradually prepare the public for the idea of benevolent aliens from outer space coming to help us. However, it is now understood that these aliens may not be as benevolent as initially portrayed. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Bill Moore gained prominence in the UFO community with his book The Roswell Incident, which brought attention back to the Roswell UFO crash. Most of the details we know about Roswell come from Moore's book. Moore met with Paul Benowitz regularly after asking to meet, and Paul expressed frustration that despite sending a significant amount of data to the Air Force, he received no response. Moore then shared with Paul a secret government file called Project Aquarius, which proved that the Air Force was analyzing Paul's data without his knowledge. The last paragraph of the Aquarius document reveals that its contents are classified as top secret, with no dissemination outside official intelligence channels. It also mentions that Paul Benowitz's case is being monitored by NASA and any future evidence should be forwarded to them to avoid public exposure. Majestic is a group of individuals who have control over the information regarding UFOs, including sightings, investigations, and any mention of them. Only Majestic has the authority to determine how to proceed with this information. One member of Majestic, Paul, who is a pilot, began conducting flyovers near Dulce, New Mexico, where he believed there was an underground base called Arcoleta Mesa. During these flyovers, he captured photos of domes, vents, underground structures, and large towers, which he included in his reports. However, while monitoring alien transmissions, Paul discovered a disturbing revelation. It seemed that there was some sort of relationship or agreement between the aliens and the United States government. This relationship deteriorated, and during Paul's next flight, he witnessed scorched ground, flattened trees, and even downed aircraft, indicating a battle had taken place over Dulce. If the United States were to win a war against the aliens, a new weapon and strategy would be necessary. Fortunately, Paul Benowitz had both. He created a document called Project Beta, which outlined the alien takeover plan, a strategy to defeat them, and a weapon that could be utilized. He even constructed a working prototype of an energy weapon. Project Beta revealed that the aliens had abducted roughly 300,000 Americans, implanted them with devices, and then returned them to the general population. These implants essentially turned every human into a walking camera and microphone, with the ability to manipulate memories, control minds, or even disable the brain entirely. At the Dulce base, horrific genetic experiments involving the splicing of alien DNA with humans were being conducted. Paul Benowitz sent Project Beta to his senators, other elected officials, and even the President of the United States, but only received a letter in response, stating that Project Blue Book was closed and the Air Force no longer investigated UFOs. Paul knew this was a lie, as he possessed the Project Aquarius document that proved the government's involvement. It seemed evident that the government had been compromised, with senior military officials, politicians, and even the president potentially being implanted. Over time, Paul became increasingly frustrated and paranoid, believing he was constantly being watched and followed. He took extreme measures, keeping knives and guns throughout his house, and experienced significant weight loss and chain smoking. Paul claimed that aliens were entering his home at night and injecting him with something that caused him to drive into the desert, with no recollection of these events upon his return home. Bill Moore and Richard Doty, along with Paul's friends and family, noticed needle marks on Paul's arm. Concerned about his declining mental health, his loved ones urged him to stop his research on aliens and focus on his business. However, Paul was adamant about the importance of his research and became increasingly paranoid. He believed that his wife had an alien implant and even barricaded himself in his house. Eventually, Paul's family had him committed to a psychiatric facility. It turned out that the alien transmissions that Paul decoded were actually sent by the NSA, who had also replaced his computer to manipulate the decoded messages. Paul fell victim to the government's counterintelligence plan, but he was not the only one affected. Doty offered Moore a deal. In exchange for government documents on UFOs and knowledge of what the government was hiding, Moore would disseminate fake UFO stories created by Doty and report on individuals within the UFO community. Doty's objective was to identify UFO enthusiasts and gather information on their knowledge. This was prompted by concerns that if someone like Paul Benowitz could intercept secret military data, others could potentially do the same. During this period, there were suspicions that the United States was developing and testing either stealth or drone technology at Kirtland Air Base, which was classified information that couldn't fall into enemy hands. This is how Paul Benowitz became connected with Bill Moore. It was a setup, where Moore was given the Aquarius document and instructed to pass it on to Benowitz. However, the counterintelligence campaign started to unravel when Moore noticed discrepancies in the details of the document given to him by Doty. When Moore expressed his concerns, Doty dismissed them, claiming that the document had been sanitized and redacted for security reasons. Moore, however, didn't believe this explanation, as he had seen the original Aquarius document and knew the differences. The plan was for Benowitz to go public with the fraudulent document, after which the government would step in to discredit him. Moore was now being asked to lie to a fellow UFO researcher on behalf of the US government, someone he considered a friend. It was a difficult position for Moore, and he initially chose to do nothing for several months. Eventually, Doty threatened Moore, stating that if he didn't deliver the document, he would cut off all communication. Faced with this ultimatum, Moore reluctantly complied and gave Benowitz the fraudulent Project Aquarius document. However, Moore pleaded with Benowitz to never speak of it, trying to protect him from the repercussions. Meanwhile, Doty still needed to address Benowitz's belief in underground bases near Dulce. Considering the extensive effort, time, and expenses devoted to deceiving Paul Benowitz, it raises questions about who ordered this operation and why. Was it solely to discredit one UFO enthusiast? Benowitz was the subject of interest for multiple government agencies, who were actively trying to discredit him by feeding him disinformation. Once the revelation became public, it caused shock among the audience, regardless of their beliefs. Moore's confession ultimately ended his career in UFO research. It is clear that our government, military, law enforcement, and elected officials have a duty to protect the American people, but it seems that this duty does not extend to individual citizens who may interfere with their agenda. Those who challenge the government may face severe consequences, including the destruction of their reputation, finances, and career. The government justifies these actions in the name of national security, but it begs the question of how many lives have been sacrificed for this cause. If you found this information valuable, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing. That's all for today. Goodbye.